All right, well, I want to take this time to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us here on the Freedom Forum today, where we are discussing the topic, subversive perspectives on the death of George Floyd. I do want to make you aware that we are recording this forum, and it will be made available on our Freedom website at freedomchurchbaltimore.org, as well as our Freedom Facebook page at Facebook Freedom Church Baltimore. I want to ask all of you if you'd please remain muted until we open up for questions at the end of the presentation. We'll allow for an opportunity of Q&A when Pastor Mike has finished the presentation. I want to also remind you to be respectful of the speaker as well as everyone else on the call. So please be sensitive with your comments and the things that you post in the chat. I want to let you also know that you can type questions and comments during the chat presentation, okay? And at the end of the presentation, we're going to seek to answer as many possible questions as we can today, okay? I want to also encourage you to check out the Subversive Institute at thesubversiveinstitute.org, and to also follow them on Facebook, and putting the information in the chat for you as well. And then Pastor Mike's going to give us a little bit more information on some other Subversive Institute videos that he's going to be posting later this week, so that you can join into those as well. So with that said, again, I want to thank you all for joining, and I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Pastor Mike.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for tuning in. And we are, on the one hand, not happy that we're having to do this on this occasion, but we are happy that we're able to get together, and we actually have a medium by which we can get together and talk about things that are important to us. And Pastor Jeremy texted me, and we had a few talks about would I come in and do a forum on this, and I said, of course. And so I want to thank Freedom Church for always being open to discussing things. I know that Freedom Church continues to believe that the Bible is inspired by God. It's the final authority on everything. It's inerrant, without errors, and it's sufficient, so that it either speaks directly or indirectly to all matters of life, including the death of George Floyd. And we look to it to shape our opinions, our worldviews, our ideas about everything. And so because of that, there's no subject, there's no situation, there's no circumstance where we are caught off guard, where we cannot enter in with the gospel and with the person and work of Jesus Christ and address it. And so we're happy to do that. So I want a special thanks to Freedom for always being a church that's open to deal with real issues. Also, want to thank you guys for giving some of your time and tuning in for this. And then, as Pastor Jeremy said, I got some birds that want to chime in here, so I'm going to try to get them out of the way. As Pastor Jeremy said, we have been at the Subversive Institute just kind of really trying to look at this and think about this from a Subversive Institute perspective. Now, some of you may have heard of the Subversive Institute, some of you have not. The Subversive Institute was really born out of me having to deal with issues like this as a pastor. A lot of you know that 11 years ago, I moved to Baltimore City with a burden to plant a church in Baltimore City that made disciples and invested particularly in Black men, and also positioned the church to be able to deal with issues just like this. And, probably about 4 or 5 years in, what I started to realize is that the systemic issues in Baltimore City, economic opportunity or the lack thereof, educational issues and challenges, poverty, the justice system, the police department, violence, all of these things, I realized, wait, I could keep doing this and we could keep doing this and never really impact those issues. In other words, Freedom Church and many churches like Freedom were poised to do micro work, but not macro work. We did a lot of micro work, but not macro work. And that bothered me. It bothered me for a lot of reasons. I'm not going to go into all the reasons, but sometimes it kept me up at night. And so that was the beginning of my journey to say, I want to be a part of a movement of Christians who not only do micro work, who serve individual people and make sure people have things to eat, but also impact the whole, to have a substantive impact on systemic issues that are happening in and around our city. And so that was kind of the birthing of Subversive Institute. And then as things got clearer for me, I felt a real call to go into this and to really be a part of what we would call more of a Nehemiah work, not raising money for buildings, not the spiritualization of Nehemiah, but really Nehemiah, which he was basically a civic reformer. He went into cities and actually built real walls, addressed social economic injustice, racial injustice, genderism, the fact that there was structural, systemic nonsense going on within the Jewish religion. He was the man for that. And I saw that as a real calling to do in Baltimore City. And so I believed in it so much and so much in the welfare of the church that I believe I should step down from that in the church and really focus some of my attention in and on those things. And thus the Subversive Institute was birthed. Some people came around me that were key kind of engineers and architects like Hunter Brown and a lot of people, my son Ezra, my nephew Sanford Crawford, and a lot of you on this call actually gave me input. So the Subversive Institute is all about equipping citizens to change their city. The Institute is a bottom-up organization. I've come to believe that all sociological good comes from the bottom up. If you search human history, whether you're looking at history in the Bible or out of the Bible, whenever change came, the majority of that change comes from the bottom up. And so we just believe in that. And so I believe if we're going to address these issues, the citizens have to be equipped and empowered to change. And so that's what the Subversive Institute's all about. And we were doing a lot of kind of beta testing work last year. We kind of took off at the beginning of this year. And then like many people and many organizations, COVID-19 has ransacked us. And so we kind of been sidelined. And until recently, we've been doing some stuff. And so we would really encourage you guys to check out our website. I just wrote 2 new kind of solutions that are on our solutions page. 12 things you can do to minimize and stop police brutality, and also 10 things you can do to change. And these are all in response to what you see going around us, whether it be the violence here in Baltimore, which by the way hasn't stopped because we're quarantined, or whatever. So what I want to do with the time we have remaining is I want to give you what I call some subversive perspectives on the death of George Floyd. Now, if you're looking for a sermon, you tune in the wrong place. I have preached many sermons on this. They're in the Freedom Archives, but these are subversive perspectives. Subversive. That means the perspectives are particularly on an angle of how can we change the situation. If you guys want people preaching, ranting, yelling, screaming, looting, lighting things on fire, marching, protesting, we already have a lot of that. What we don't have a lot of is people actually saying, if you were to do this, it might change what happened. It might minimize what happened. We might actually see substantive change. And what I decided to do is walk the lonely road and often kind of antagonized road of letting everyone else do what most people do during these things and focus on what could we do to actually change this so that it doesn't happen as much or maybe never again, maybe. So first perspective I want to give you is response. So when this whole thing happened, and of course we've had a series of these things, right? We had Aubrey get shot, and again, when Aubrey was shot, a lot of people didn't understand. I mean, he was murdered, right? I mean, that's obvious, right? But a lot of people don't understand that there's a law in Georgia that legally allows for citizens of Georgia to detain and arrest people who they suspect are committing a crime. It's a law. Let that sink in. So when you go, oh, that guy got shot, we need to do something, that's racism. Yeah, but it's actually legal. It's legalized, like there's a law. And a lot of Christians, particularly, I don't know what happened to us, but like we're not really thinking. And so when we think about responses, I think we're responsible to take every thought captive. But we've got to think holistically. So even in that case, we're thinking, wait a second, if we're going to deal with stuff like that, we can't deal with it without addressing the law. So I've been suggesting all along that if you live in Georgia, you can protest and burn stuff and loot all you want. But if you don't change that law, it's going to happen again. Someone's going to see someone who they think's committing a crime, and they're going to arrest them. There's going to be resistance, and pow, 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 and the person's going to get shot. And then when you take them to trial, my brothers and my sisters, don't be surprised if they don't really get the penalty, because it's legal to arrest people. And this is what the Subversive Institute's all about. It's going deeper than huffing and puffing and crying and protesting and being angry and burning stuff. It's like, how do we actually change stuff? So like many of you, when I saw the tape of George Floyd and crying out for his life, I was angry, I was sad, I was confused, I was frustrated, I was asking 1,000 questions, I was going all deep into the Psalms. You know, the psalmist goes with God, asking questions, pleading, imprecatory prayers, all that. And to this day still experience that. I got a text from a pastor earlier today, and he told me he made light mention of this issue and got pushback. And I'm like, yeah, it's all over. I've had all those responses, but in terms of a response, a subversive response is to look deeper into the issue. It's like you take the issue, you see it's murder, it's really clear it's murder, it's obvious it's murder, it's obvious it's negligence, a lot of people are calling it racism. You've got to go in and, it's obvious there's a crime going on against George Floyd. That's obvious. But when we think of a response from a subversive issue, we start to think, okay, what is a response that would actually be beyond grieving and beyond mourning and beyond be angry, which we should be angry, all those responses. When we think of response, we're thinking about how do we respond in a way eventually that might lead to actions that might minimalize and stop stuff like that. So when we think about responses, we're embracing all of the response, but eventually we've got to get to action. The first thing, response. And I got to tell you, a lot of people are stuck on we might call the first base of response. They're still, or we might call it reacting. And I'm not going to sit here and say you shouldn't be reacting, but after a while, you got to kind of stop reacting and you got to move. After a while, you have to move. After a while, you gotta be angry, but then you've got to do something with that. You got to be frustrated, then you got to do something with that. And so a subversive approach to response is to legitimize the response, but then say, what am I going to do about this? And too many people are either turning to wickedness and injustice and nonsense, or they're just saying, I'm just gonna marinate in my response. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna have any action steps to this. All right, number two, a subversive perspective on this is to examine the environment. So when I watched this, I saw a man kneeling on a handcuffed man, and then I saw, like you did, other officers watching. And I knew right away that there was a probability there's a difference between probability and possibility, but there was a probability that this wasn't this man's first rodeo. I guessed immediately that he probably has a litany of complaints, whether they're legitimate or illegitimate, because you don't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go arrest a black man and put him on his stomach handcuff and put my knee in his neck for 9 minutes until he passes out and he dies. Like, you don't just get there from, so I knew, and then I knew if the other officers are watching this happen, that means there's a culture in that police department that at worst actively enables that kind of stuff. There's kind of cop talk of that, or at best passively enables it by not speaking out and going after it. Then let's talk a little bit about the environment of video recording. Now, here's some of you guys going to get mad at me, but it is what it is. I love the quote by Bernice King, who said, in 1967, there was a poll, and my father was the most hated man in America. Now Martin Luther King is a hero. If he was alive today, people wouldn't like him. You know why? Because he'd be telling us stuff we don't want to hear, right? Some of you on this call have been justifying a lot of stuff that's happening right now, and King would be against that. But I'm going to tell you something right now. I'm not really down with 10, 12, 15 people videotaping injustice. I like the fact that we have it on tape. What I don't like is so many times we have 5, 6, 7 angles. But what we don't see is we never see anyone interject. I won't say never, but most of the time we don't see anyone do Good Samaritan work. Someone just sent me a new video of someone, I forgot what town it was, maybe it was Chicago, and it was a man trying to defend his storefront, and his wife came out and they beat him half to death, and then they beat his wife half to death, and there's 5 or 6 camera angles. It's the same thing we see with our young kids in high school. When a fight breaks out, there's 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 cameras. Everybody's Facebooking live and everybody's doing this. I'm talking about the environment. See, Subversive says, in order for injustice to exist and be cultivated and to become systemic, you need an environment for it to grow in. Translation analogy. Weeds need a place to grow. They need a place to grow, right? They need a place. So when I'm looking at this from a subversive, I'm thinking about response, and then I'm thinking about the environment. What kind of environment exists for this to happen? And then I think we have to change that environment, or we have to seek to change the environment. We have to seek to change the environment where cops feel comfortable to kill civilians and where other cops feel comfortable watching them do it, and where bystanders feel comfortable recording it and not stepping in. That's an environment issue. That's a recipe for injustice, because what you have is you have a police department that has an environment that allows it. You have police officers that feel enabled to do it. You have other officers that will watch, and then you have the public that will record it. This ain't no movie. Like, George Floyd did not get up and go, man, that was a rough scene, man. I got to go back in and take 5. That's not what happened. He died because a police department, officers, other officers watched, and citizens watched. We're going to get to action steps, but this is why when people say, what can we do? I always say, the parable of Good Samaritan is not something you just tuck away and tell stories and preach on once every 5 years. It's one of the most profound sociological catalytic texts ever presented to humanity, because if we all practiced it, there would be a lot less injustice, because the story says there was an environment. It was Jericho Road. I'm about to preach now. There was an environment. It was Jericho Road. And this environment had thieves or thugs, right? They had robbers in this environment. And this is why King said, if we're going to deal with injustice, we can't just resource Good Samaritans, we have to deal with the road to Jericho. So in this environment, this man comes down from Jerusalem and he's attacked and he's left half for dead. In other words, if someone doesn't help him, he dies. And the priest walks by and the Levite walks by. They had their video camera, all that kind of stuff. They were eyewitnesses, but they didn't do anything about it. But it was the Good Samaritan who stops and he does something about it. He looks into that environment and says, this is a messed up environment, but I'm going to step into the environment. It kind of reminds us of the gospel. It reminds us that Jesus left his environment for this environment. And he didn't just come in on a missions trip for a few days and then bounce out. He dwelt among us. He walked with us. He loved on us. He healed us. He touched us. He preached to us. He fed us. He was among us. And he finally went to the cross for us in order to change the environment, not just the individual, but thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The environment. We've got to attack the environment. And by the way, we're about to get into point number 3, which is justice. Subversive says, so all the stuff we're doing now, how is that changing that environment? If I loot Target, does it change the police department environment? If I burn CVS, does it change the police department environment? If I attack a police officer in Los Angeles, does it change the environment in Minneapolis where police officers felt it was okay to watch a man kill another man? I'm just asking. Because we're dealing with the environment. If I stop freeways through protesting, does it change the environment that people feel comfortable recording other people dying without doing anything? I'm just asking. Environment. Subversive looks at the environment. The gospel, God looked at our environment. He so loved the world that he did what? Videotaped it? That he did what? Sat aside? That he did what? Did talk shows? That he did what? He entered in to change the environment. That's what we're talking about. So the environment. Number 3, justice. Justice. So subversively, when we think about this issue, we think about justice, and we realize first and foremost that what happened to George Floyd was unjust. He did not receive justice, right? Which is why there was such a cry for the arrest of the officer and the other officers who were complicit. And my personal opinion is I think they all should be arrested and tried. But let's talk a few minutes about justice. Let's start with the obvious. What is justice for George Floyd? What is justice for George Floyd? Not what is your preference, not what is your frustration, not what is 200, 300, 400 years of injustices towards African Americans, but what is justice for George Floyd? Not partiality, but real justice. I can tell you what it's not. As I've been telling my son for the last few days, I don't, brothers and sisters, I don't know that people really even understand what justice is, or I don't even know if we were really concerned with justice and we were really infuriated with justice, here's what would have happened. Really. Everybody in New York, New Orleans, Baltimore, Dallas, Los Angeles, Seattle, Washington, London, England, everybody would have met up in Minneapolis. Be 500, 600, 700,000 people. We would have said something like, you got 3 days to arrest these 4 guys. If you don't, we will. You got 14 days to try them. If you don't, we will. You got 14 more days to come up with a sentence for these guys. If you don't, we will. We're all going to be here. We're all camping out. We're not lighting anything on fire. We're not looting anything. We're not going to stop any freeways, because that doesn't have anything really to do with justice for George Floyd. Justice for George Floyd is to ensure that the perpetrators face justice. I see a little of that, but not enough. It's been said throughout history, and a lot of you guys know this, injustice does not bring about justice. Justice brings about justice. Many people have kind of espoused that, an eye for an eye. George Floyd's life was taken. The officer who took his life should be taken. My personal belief, and I know it's not the belief of most people, I believe in capital punishment. I think it's biblical. I know that people have misused it, and I know that you put it in the hands of fallible men and women, and it gets misused, and you can't take it back. And I understand that. But I think that first-degree murder, and I even think cases of second-degree murder, are candidates for capital punishment. And so my personal belief is that this officer should die. That's what I believe. He's not gonna. Minnesota, they're not gonna put him to death. But justice for George Floyd, justice says that the people responsible for his death should pay. Justice does not say Target should pay. What did Target have to do with it? I don't get it. Like we're bringing justice to institutions and people who had nothing to do with the death of George Floyd. That's not subversive. That's stupid. That's unjust. And you can say people are frustrated, and I love how we like to make Dr. King roll in his grave by saying, but riots are the voice of those who are unheard. And everybody who quotes that knows that Dr. King would be completely against everything that's happening post George Floyd, especially all this looting and firing and all this stuff. Y'all already know that, so don't even go there. Don't take a man's. Of course it is. But a subversive approach is to say, well, justice means, well, then let's really fight for justice, like for real. And if we look in our Bible, we see this really clearly. The Bible doesn't shy away from this. You read Deuteronomy, Exodus, Leviticus, it's really clear. You do not, look, I remember when 2 or 3 years in, my son, he got jumped in his high school cafeteria. One of his friends got in a fight with some gang members that were part of the school, and because he was with them at the lunch table that day, my son got jumped. So we went to the hospital, he had a coma. Imagine if I would have got on a plane, flew to LA, and found some 11th grade high school students that I thought were gang members, and I would have beat them up. Imagine if I would have then flew to Dallas, Texas, and found a high school gym and lit it on fire. Imagine if I went to New York City and found some high school kids about to get on a bus and lit it on fire. What would you all say? Well, you would say, well, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing that. And what if I said, no, I can do that. These kids beat my son up. Okay, then why aren't you beating those kids up? Why aren't you pursuing justice for those kids? And here's why this matters. It matters because Subversive Institute is about change. And this is all deflective. This is all going all over the place. If we want to actually change what happened in Minnesota, or try to, then we have to focus. We don't need a shotgun. We need a sniper rifle. We don't need the book of Judges where everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. We don't need that. We need a king. We got one, Jesus. And we need to actually administer justice. Fourth, let's talk about change. So I've gotten to the point, and I've written on this a lot in a lot of places. And I told you before, subversiveinstitute.org. I have one document in our solutions tab that is 10 things you can do to bring about change. And on number 3 in the 10 things you can do about change, it says redirect your emotions, energy, word, posts, and behaviors towards actions that will actually create substantive change. Substantive change. This is my feeling on it. If we don't do something to change the environment, if we don't do something to bring about justice, then truly that man died in vain. Like, truly, it's vain. And in my opinion, you can burn the whole country down. You could. And still not get justice and still not change the environment that created what we experienced. And it's just too much energy. It's too much lost energy. It's too many lost words. It's too many lost bodies. I'm just thinking about, imagine tens of thousands of people with a target, like for change. Imagine all these people in front of the mayor and the city hall and their city council demanding change in the police department. Demanding things like, I don't know, mandatory minimums for police officers who watch other officers kill people. Demanding stuff like mandatory minimums for police officers who kill people. Like change, real change. Demanding things like, hey, we no longer want to hire police officers who think I'm going home at other people's expenses. We want to hire police officers who say, the civilians we serve go home at my expense. Been telling people a lot that we've heard very few stories in this COVID-19 period where over 100,000 people have died. Very few stories have we heard of doctors and nurses bowing out. Some of you know doctors and nurses. Some of you are from Freedom. We know we've got doctors and nurses. They're going to work daily and being faced with the COVID. They strap up, they get their PPE gear and they go in and they face the threat and the possibility of getting infected and possibly dying. They understand their job is to put the person who's sick first at their own expense. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you right now, I've seen in my short life, 52 years, I'm telling you right now, I've never seen so many police officers who think me first. And I know some police officers don't think that. And I know people want to debate me. There's no debate. You're a civil servant. Like, you are there to preserve the rights of the citizens, their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's why you're there. And so traffic stops and all these light things, pulling your gun, that's just, a righteous officer knows that's overkill. That's a me first mentality. What am I saying? I'm saying change. And I'm saying that this is an opportunity we have to actually work towards change, which means we need to be able to identify how change comes about. I've asked people for almost a year now, how do you get a law passed in Baltimore? People don't know. If you don't know how to pass a law, you don't know how to change culture. Laws affect environment. Environment affects culture. Culture is what breeds behavior, change. This man's death is too valuable for us to just burn stuff down, loot, and then the department stays the same. And then it happens again. And then it happens somewhere else and we do it again and again and again. We would love to see what we call substantive change, like revolutionary, altering, reorienting change, real change. And the Subversive Institute's pretty much committed. If it doesn't change things, we're not interested. We're not saying it's bad, but it's vanity. Like, it's vanity. So I'm asking myself, if I'm going to go protest, how is this going to change something? Because if that protest isn't about change, why would I protest? Just to protest? I'm not, if you want to protest just to protest, be your guest. It's your First Amendment right. But my life, 52 years in, I want things to change. I want every single breath to count. If I'm going to march, I want every step to count. What are we marching for? What are the demands we're placing upon the mayor, the city councilor, and the governor? What are we going to do if they don't meet those demands? Are our demands articulated? Will our demands, if executed upon, actually affect change? Or are they just, we want justice? What does that even mean? Do you want the officer dead? 30 years, 20 years, 15 years? What do you want to do? And so this is a tremendous opportunity for us to reorient the way we think. We have to think differently because we need to change things. And it's not enough to just Facebook. It's not enough to just complain. It's not enough to state the obvious. Congratulations, Captain Obvious. Another black man was murdered and it's horrible, and we live in a systemic racist system of police department. Congratulations. You've been saying what people have been saying for hundreds of years. Do you want a sticker? How do we change it? That's my question. And it's not just one way. I'm just throwing out some ways, but I'm saying subversive perspective is we've got to change. Otherwise, we're the fools. We're going to do another forum in a year. Another cop's going to shoot, another white cop's going to shoot a black guy, probably in a year. We're going to do another forum. You want me to hit repeat, or you just want to record this one? Everyone tune in and listen to what I said. Or do we want to say, everyone in this call took this to heart and said, what can I do to put a brick on that wall, to rebuild that wall? What can I do? It may not all be the same thing. And just being an absorber, a sponge of information is not enough. It's a call to action. That's why that parable, the Good Samaritan, is so condemning of the American church, because we are the priest and the Levite. We're walking by. If you live in Baltimore City like me, you're the priest and the Levite. Tell me how we can have thousands of churches in this city and have 300 murders every year. You know how? Because we're priests and Levites. We walk by, and our theology allows us to do it. Our principles, our creeds, our traditions, our songs, and we comfort ourselves somehow. But true religion says, wait a minute, we got to be the Good Samaritans. So the question is how do we actually affect change? It's about change. Lastly, action. We talked about response, environment, justice, change, and action. And I've been hitting on this a lot. So action. As you can tell, I get really excited about this and so passionate. I just believe, like, if you see something, say something. And if you see something, do something. And again, on our solutions page, I wrote 12 things you can do to minimize and stop police brutality. You know what the first thing is? When you see a police officer brutalizing a man, do something. Do something about it. You say, well, if I step in, they'll arrest me. Good, get arrested. You might save someone's life. They might shoot me. So would you rather record them shooting someone or be a part of possibly saving them? This is what it comes down to. Love your neighbors yourself. This is a crux. Now, the world has tossed the Bible, the biblical ethic, the law of God, the gospel, everything. They tossed it. Church, it's all antiquated, dumb crap, slave-owning, white man stuff. You want to join them and be irrelevant, or you want to say, nah, I'm a be a good Samaritan. This doesn't mean you ride around the city looking for it. It simply means as you're walking along, doing your life, when you see injustice, you don't go home and Facebook about it. You actually step in. You become risky. You become a person who's willing to risk their life. And by the way, what happens to us if we're in that scenario and we perceive police brutality and we step in and the police shoot us and kill us? What happens to us? We go to hell? No. We meet Jesus face to face instantaneously. And how did we die? We died trying to actually bring justice to pass. We died trying to stop injustice. Now, let's be honest. Y'all know I love my Reese's. I don't want to die eating Reese's. That's a poor testimony. Behold, he died in his basement watching motocross, eating Reese's. I don't want to die like that. Stephen was stoned preaching the gospel. I want to die like that. Action. Another action item we placed in that 12 things you can do that Hunter Brown encouraged me this afternoon. because Hunter brings up the point that a lot of times when I make suggestions, people go, oh, it's too hard, it's too radical, that can never happen, blah, 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 blah. So number 12 is, if you don't like the suggestions above, develop your own list and mobilize others to take action along with you. A lot of times people say, well, what do we do? Sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I think we're just too complicated. I think all of our wisdom is driven us mad. I think Google and Facebook, living in this information age, has driven us mad. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He simply said, love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that complicated. You see your neighbor walking out the door and they fall over. What do? Do you like Google? No, you go over there. You call 911. So that's what it's about. If you want to hang out with Subversive Institute, we got petitions for you to sign. I mean, there's so many places and opportunities that you can go and things that you can do. But I think we're in a time of action. And I think that I want to end with this. I believe that our action needs to point a change. That's what I believe.
Can't hear it.
Okay? Yes. Whoever is MPT Design, we can hear you. So you're not muted. So if you can mute your mic, that would be great. The thing is that, so the call is to action. George Floyd is dead. Minnesota is burnt. What should I do? If it was a tornado, what would you do? I'm just asking. Some denominations, if it was a tornado, you know what they do? They'd send their relief teams in. I'm just saying. What would you do if it was a tornado? You know that there's a lot of business owners had nothing to do with killing George Floyd. Their businesses are gone, they're lost. We don't know what to do. Find a broken, burnt down business and go find the owner. Bless them with some money. Help them clean up their shop. Bring them a meal. Like, the world is wide open for Jesus. And what are we doing? The opportunities for change are here. So, all right, I'm gonna stop because I could take up the whole hour. You guys know I'm passionate. You got me crying and preaching and getting all like Malcolm X. So I know Jeremy's got some questions on here, and I'm gonna try to, Jeremy, jump in here if, I think we said you're gonna go ahead and ask them, or you want me to just read them off here?
I'll tell you what, I'll let you read them off since that'll probably just go faster.
All right, can the medical services folks meet with the police department to train and write new policies on how to safely apprehend criminals? Yes, please, 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 please. Let me speak to this for just a second. So exactly. So you guys have no doubt seen the discrepancy between how African-American men in particular and women are treated over white men and women when they're arrested. There is kind of a little bit of a bias because white men can have knives and guns and all, and somehow they don't get shot and they don't get kneeled on for 8 minutes and they get reasoned with and they get tackled and the officers get hurt and it's okay. But I ain't taking no knife from no black guy, right? And then we've kind of lost the idea that perhaps some of the people we're dealing with have special needs or mental disabilities. So yes, can the medical folks? Yes. Will the police department want to meet with you? Come on now. Probably not. So you go, well, what if they won't meet with us? Well, then you need to put them in a position where they have to. Why? Because it's in the best interest of the police department and the citizens. Part of the training of a police officer shouldn't just be jumping, running, kicking codes, writing, sitting in a car, drug bust. It should be mental health. And by the way, I know they say they do this, but also the mental health of the police department, the officers. So absolutely. Can they? Yes. So how about this? You, whoever you were, asked this question, you should get with your medical people, right? And this is how we roll at Subversive. We put all our stuff on one page, and it's got to be simple. Boop, 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 boop. Write up something brief, and then say, hey, call the police department call your local police department, say, I want to meet with the lieutenant or the detective or your community person. They always have a community person, and meet with them and say, hey man, we would love to meet with you guys and just share our expertise in hopes that it might make you more effective, more compassionate, and just better police officers. Start there. And then if they won't listen, you have to get more subversive. I'm just saying. So I think that's a great question. And oh, would to God that that was happening all across the nation. Number two, give all police officers 20 plus years of death penalty for killing an innocent citizen in this country now. That's not necessarily a question, but it's a statement. So you realize that you can't give, let's talk about the law for a minute, because a lot of people don't understand this. You realize you can't give a person a death penalty if the state doesn't have the death penalty. And a lot of states don't have the death penalty. So you can't kill somebody without it being legal to do it. So again, if that's how you roll, you need to mobilize people and get the death penalty to be part of the penal code. But also, you understand that a lot of times people are frustrated because the citizen seems to be on a different penal code or justice code than the police. We probably need to figure that out. And that's why I suggested on the Subversive Institute website, under the Solutions tab, under 10 things you can do, I suggested, hey, in our various communities, of going to our mayor, our city council, and demanding this stuff. By the way, those of us who are in and around Baltimore, you know the top 3 mayors, people in the running for mayor: Mary Miller, Brandon Scott, and Sheila Dixon. If you go on their website, they have crime plans. Dixon and Scott's crime plans are comprehensive, but they don't say much. They just say that. Mary Miller's is simple, so I respect that. But none of their crime plans are going to fix crime. You can read them for yourself and come to your own thing. Why am I telling you this? Because I'm telling you this because if you guys want to see change, you're going to have to make change. They're not going to bring the change. So I'm all for new policies and all that stuff, but you got to figure out how laws are made, and you got to figure out how am I going to articulate those laws so that we said in number 12 on the things you can do to minimize and stop police brutality. You got to create these things. And if you think police officers who are arrested and convicted of first-degree murder should have the death penalty, then try to pass that. It's going to be a long, arduous thing, but fight for it. And if you don't get that, fight for mandatory minimums. Because I believe it would change police culture if they knew, A, if I get convicted of first-degree murder, I'm serving a mandatory minimum of, say, 30 years. Second degree, 20 years. Third degree, 15 years. If I sit by and watch it, 15 years. It changes the culture. Right now, I don't see any accountability. Zero, other than personal integrity. That's not enough. Our country should tell you that. All right, third, media. Never give out the name of any video person. Start a citizens group to meet and speak with active retired police officers and their wives. I don't know if that's a question, but it says, thanks for standing up. I'm tired of crying. We are too, bro. We are too. We are too. And I like the idea of starting citizens groups. By the way, this is just something for your perspective, just something to think about, okay? I think monolithic culture, in other words, the United States being pretty united, that started to die in the 60s. By the way, if you want to watch a really great documentary, I think it's the best documentary ever made on Martin Luther King. Get HBO. If you can't get it, buy it. It's worth it. Watch King in the Wilderness. If you watched it, watch it again. It's the greatest documentary on King. But Dr. King was beginning to realize that he couldn't keep everyone on the same page. And it was one of the things that not only drove him crazy, but broke his heart, okay? But why is this important? It's important because as we think about actually bringing in change, we have to realize that we're never gonna have a president that unites the country. So stop saying that. Y'all are like, Trump is divisive and he doesn't unite us. Obama did? Really? Obama did? People don't like Obama either. The idea that we're gonna get a president that unites the nations, It's this. It's good talk. It's not true. The United States changed sociologically. We're no longer this macro nation. We're a nation of micro affiliate cultural groups. When people protest in New York, there's like 25 different groups in that big mob. They all have different values, different agendas, all different nonprofits. You go into Baltimore City and you say, man, I want to help people who've been arrested. There's like 15 people doing that. You can get them all on the same page. They all got their little flavor of ice cream. That ain't the way. All I'm saying is this idea stated in here, start a citizens group. Yes, 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 yes. What we need is millions of good Samaritans. What Baltimore needs is 60,000. That's 10% of our population. Good Samaritans. The city would be turned upside down. Just 10% turned upside down. If people just said, you know what? If I see something, I'm going to do something. If I see something, I'm going to say something.
Hey, Mike, I just want to take you back up. There was a question right before that. You said earlier that if we see someone being arrested, that instead of filming, we should step in. What are some of the ways that you suggest we step in without furthering an escalated situation?
Okay, so if it's possible, I would have someone film it. But someone has to step in. So say the question one more time to make sure I get it. What are some?
Yeah, so what are some ways that you would suggest we step in without furthering an escalated situation?
Okay, so let me try to do this respectfully. In the case of George Floyd, the situation was kind of escalated already. He was being killed. So I don't really know like how you escalate that more. He was being killed. That's, let me break that down. That's a Jew being loaded on a car to Auschwitz. They don't come home. Like escalation, if you were to run at a Nazi soldier, you can't escalate it. It's already escalated. Like there's no higher. I think I know what you're saying, but I'm trying to say there's no higher. In that scenario, it's escalated. Actually, action is the only thing that may de-escalate. Actions don't always. So let me give you an illustration. You can look this up on the internet. There's a video in Los Angeles of these officers trying to arrest a black man. And none other than Denzel Washington parks his car and walks over there and helps them calm the guy down and arrest him peaceably. That's what I'm talking about. You can't really control whether a situation's going to escalate because you can't control people. You don't know if the police officer is going to take it another notch or go, man, you're talking some sense, you're helping here. What are some things you can do? You can affirm to the officers, I believe in law, I believe in police officers, I believe you have good intent here, I believe you probably have probable cause to arrest this man. I perceive what you're doing is exaggerated, negligent, and overkill. And I don't like you doing. Step back, sir, and you keep moving in. Now, I know no one else is going to tell you this, and I'm not saying y'all have to agree with me. I'm just telling you what I think the Bible would say, because we all say we Christians. I think when God saw us going to hell, he didn't sit and write a blog. He came into humanity, lived a perfect life, and then died on the cross. He took action. And we got, we got texts like in Proverbs that it says, woe to those who say, I never saw them being led away to slaughter. We've already seen this. So I think that we can talk about tactics, we can talk about all that stuff, and maybe we need to have, in the Civil Rights Organization, they used to train for this. And maybe what we could do is we could get with some police officers and find a police officer and say, hey, if I were to see a situation, what would you advise? Most police officers are going to tell you stay out because that's what officers do. This is the power of police officers. We're doing their arrests. It's our job. And we can tell you not to get involved even when we're breaking the law. And if you get involved, we might arrest you or hurt you. At what point does a citizen go, no, reform is working within the system and structures. Revolution is replacing it. At that point, that police officer, that police department needs to be replaced. So I'm a little bit more radical on that end. I'm a little bit more Xian in that end. Like at some point, you got to say enough is enough. We got to step in. And we've seen this happen before. We see it happen in these riots both ways. We see the cop who was surrounded by a mob and they were beating him, and citizens jumped in and saved him and brought him back to the police department. What if they wouldn't have jumped in? Could their jumping in have escalated things? Possibly. Did they get hurt? Possibly. But at some point, we can't control the outcome, but we have to be guilty of doing something. We can no longer afford to watch Black men die at the hands of white police officers. We have to do something. And I know that's whatever, but we got to do something.
All right, Pastor Mike. We have a few responses, but with the time we have left, I'm just going to go ahead and jump down to the question. In your opinion, should more African Americans join the police force?
Absolutely. One of the things we talk about in the 12 things that you can do to minimize and stop police brutality. Number 10, become a police officer and model the type of policing you want to have. Become a police officer and model the type of policing you want to have. You're going to be part of the problem or the solution. You see something, do something. You see something, say something. So absolutely. But it's not enough for African Americans to become a police officer, because some police departments are systemically unjust and they're injected with bias and racism. And so good people get in those systems and they become contaminated with the nonsense that's in there. So it's not just about becoming an officer. It's about becoming an officer and being willing to be fired, ridiculed, isolated, marginalized, because you're going to stand up for what's right. You're not going to watch fellow officers kill. You're not going to watch them take stuff under the table. You ain't doing it. So yeah, we need more officers, but we just don't need more people to come in, and we just don't need more Black people. We need more people who are going to jump in there and they're going to be righteous. So I noticed one of the brothers said, I think he's responding to me saying we should jump in, to escalation. So I just want to say this. And again, I'm Subversive Institute. I believe that social revolution is Baltimore's only solution without guns. So I believe that what has to happen to Baltimore to change is most of our systemic problems are coming from systemically wicked institutions. We don't need to reform them. They need to be replaced. The police chief needs to go. We don't need a police chief. Our mayor system needs to go. We don't need to elect mayors. City council, go. We need a whole new way of government. I'm radical, okay? I'm radical because I've seen decades of this. It doesn't work, it's broken. I'm not about that. So when it comes to escalation, my thing is, look, sometimes in order for peace to happen, blood has to pour. It's reality. Some people think that the only way to fix a problem is to lay down. You don't get that reading your Bible. Jesus didn't lay down on the cross. He died on the cross, and it was a violent death. Why do we believe that, given the doctrine of total depravity, that the response to total depravity is to give people ice cream cones? Why do we believe that? That's not the response. So are we to be anarchists? No, but I think we're called as Christians to be about righteousness, and sometimes that means our personal safety and our environments are escalated to points where they're not comfortable and they're not peaceful for the greater good. And look, one last thing. So let's say in the case of George Floyd, he's being killed and someone tries to do something and they wrestle him and George still gets killed. And now that person gets wrestled and they get beat up into a coma. So it didn't work. Have we reduced morality to utilitarianism? I'm not backing down on this point. Right is right, whether it's comfortable, whether it's convenient, whether it's appropriate, whether it's got the consent of the majority, whether you get likes. Right is right. It's always right. You know what they told Dr. King? All this marching and all this speaking is just causing more problems. You need to go home and be a Baptist pastor. You're causing problems. You walked across Selma and they got their brains beat in. Your fault. You shouldn't do that. All I'm saying is, look, we can no longer watch Black men be killed by officers and do nothing. Most people are going to watch and keep videotaping. And then they're going to loot and burn cities down and then be astounded that it keeps happening. Because they ain't about nothing. They're not going to change nothing. I'm not going to be one of them. If I see an officer brutalizing a Black man, I'm going to do something. If I go to jail, I go to jail. If I get my arm broke, get my arm broke. If I get tackled or maced, I get tackled or maced. If they shoot me, they shoot me. I'm going to die doing what's right. And if you're not comfortable with that, pray for me that I don't die when I do it. And pray for many others that believe what I believe, that the first thing you can do to stop and minimize police brutality is when you see something, do something.
All right. Well, it is a little past 5 o'clock, and so we do want to let you have your evening back. I want to thank Pastor Mike for sharing his perspectives, subversive perspectives on the death of George Floyd. Obviously, it's a senseless and tragic death, and there's much more to be done, even past this current conversation. So I want to encourage you to continue to pray, continue to process, continue to encourage and support one another and hold each other up through this as we process. And if you want to learn more about how you can get involved and be a part of change, go ahead and check out the Subversive Institute. I've put the information there. You can copy and paste that, and you can check that out. Pastor Mike, you're going to be speaking again on this tomorrow evening, correct?
Yep, tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Subversive Institute will be covering, we're actually going through the 10 things you can do to bring about change. You can see those but we're covering 6 through 10. We went through 1 through 5 already. That's on our YouTube channel. You can check that out, or our Facebook page. But we'll be live tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. You can check us out then.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Pastor Mike. Thank you all for your time. God bless you. Grace and peace.
Grace and peace.